Tonight, you're invited to drift beneath the surface of early America, to a quieter world hidden below roads, homes, and towns, a place shaped slowly by patient hands and gentle purpose. In this story, we'll travel through forgotten underground spaces, from cool root cellars and stone culverts to silent tunnels and resting foundations, all lying peacefully beneath familiar landscapes you may have walked across without ever knowing. As you listen, your breathing can slow, your thoughts can soften, and your body can begin its journey into deep, natural sleep. If stories like this help you rest, consider subscribing to this channel for more calm nights and peaceful journeys through history. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling us which place in America you're listening from tonight. A city, a town, or somewhere quiet under the stars. Now get comfortable. Let the day fade away and allow the earth beneath your feet to carry you gently into rest. Long before streets were named, before towns were mapped, and before the steady hum of modern life settled across the land, the ground beneath what would become America lay quiet and undisturbed. Forest soil rested beneath towering trees. Riverbanks curved naturally, shaped only by water and time. Beneath the surface, earth layered itself patiently, sand, clay, stone, unchanged for centuries. In those early days, people lived mostly above the ground, guided by sunlight and seasons. Shelters were simple, built from timber and stone, resting lightly upon the soil. There was little reason to dig deep. Nature provided generously on the surface, and the land itself felt vast and endless. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that relationship began to shift. As small settlements formed along rivers and coastlines, people noticed the steady rhythm of the earth beneath their feet. They observed how cool the ground remained even on the hottest summer days, and how warmth lingered below during winter's quiet grip. They noticed that roots thrived below the surface, protected from wind and frost. And with gentle curiosity, not urgency, the first changes began. At first, the digging was modest, a shallow pit here, a small hollow there, just enough to store harvested vegetables away from heat and animals. These early underground spaces were not ambitious or grand. They were practical, patient, and thoughtful. The earth was not conquered, it was carefully borrowed from. People learned to listen to the land. They felt the resistance of compacted soil and the softness of loam. They noticed where stone appeared quickly and where earth yielded more easily. Digging became less about force and more about understanding. Each movement of soil told a story of what lay beneath. As settlements grew, so did the quiet reliance on what existed below the surface. Root cellars became common, gently tucked beneath homes or hillsides. Cool, dark, and still, these spaces offered preservation and calm. They were places where time slowed, where food rested, and where the temperature barely changed throughout the year. The earth began to change, not dramatically, but thoughtfully. Paths formed above ground as people traveled between homes, wells, and fields, and soon subtle changes followed below those paths. Small channels guided rainwater away from foundations. Stones were arranged to allow water to pass beneath roads without disturbing the surface. These early underground features worked silently, unnoticed by most, yet essential to daily life. There was no rush. Life moved at a pace dictated by daylight and seasons. Digging happened by hand, one careful movement at a time. Each shovel of earth was lifted with intention, placed gently aside, often reused nearby. Nothing was wasted, nothing was hurried. In the evenings, after the day's labor, people rested. Fires burned low. The ground beneath them held steady, unchanged by the sounds above. Beneath the crackle of wood and quiet conversation, underground spaces waited patiently, doing their work without recognition. As years passed, communities learned that the land beneath their feet could support more than storage. Wells reached deeper, tapping into cool, reliable water sources. The act of digging downward became a symbol of trust that the earth would provide, that the walls would hold, that careful craftsmanship mattered. Every underground structure reflected patience. There were no machines roaring, no engines breaking stone, only hands, tools, and time. The earth responded slowly, and so did the people working it. This mutual pace created spaces that felt natural rather than imposed. Beneath small towns, networks of quiet functionality emerged. Drainage channels curved gently. Stone-lined passages guided water away after storms. Shallow tunnels allowed cool air to move beneath buildings. None of it was meant to impress. All of it was meant to endure. And because these spaces were hidden, they remained calm. While life above ground changed, children growing older, seasons repeating, settlements expanding, the underground world stayed mostly the same. It did not rush forward. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, steady and reliable. Over time, people came to trust what they could not see. They walked across roads knowing water would pass beneath. They stored food underground without worry. They slept above spaces carefully shaped by hands long forgotten. The ground had become a partner in daily life, offering quiet support rather than dominance. The changes beneath America were never loud. They did not announce themselves. They unfolded slowly, layer by layer, year by year. Each generation added a little more understanding, a little more care, and in doing so, they created a foundation, both literal and symbolic, for everything that would come later. Eventually, larger systems would emerge, towns would grow, technology would accelerate. But beneath all of that progress, those early underground spaces remained, a reminder of a time when building meant listening, when change meant patience, and when the earth was shaped gently, with respect. Even now, as you rest, the ground beneath you holds that same quiet strength. It remembers hands that worked slowly. It remembers the calm intention of early builders, and it continues, as it always has, to support life above, without sound, without urgency, without need for recognition. And as the earth rests beneath everything we build, you too are free to rest now. Nothing else is required, just the steady rhythm of breath and the quiet comfort of knowing that long before now, the ground learned how to hold us gently. Before the land was measured and marked, before lines were drawn to divide property or plan towns, the landscape of early America existed in a state of quiet balance. There were no roads to guide footsteps, no pipes hidden beneath the ground, and no stone foundations anchoring buildings in place. The land was open, continuous, and patient. Forests stretched for miles, their canopies filtering sunlight into soft patterns that moved gently with the breeze. The ground below was layered with fallen leaves, pine needles, and rich soil, built slowly over countless seasons. Each step pressed lightly into earth that had never been compacted by wheels or hooves. The land remembered only the passing of animals and the flow of water. Rivers and streams shaped the terrain with effortless consistency. They curved naturally, responding to slope and stone rather than human intention. In spring, they widened with melting snow and seasonal rains. In summer, they slowed, reflecting the sky above. These waterways required no maintenance, no guidance, no reinforcement.
They carried water across the land exactly as nature intended. Without roads, movement followed intuition. People traveled along ridgelines where the ground stayed dry. They walked beside streams, listening to the water for direction. Paths formed slowly, not because they were planned, but because they were repeated. Grass bent under footsteps, then rose again. The earth adapted without complaint. Beneath the surface, water filtered naturally through layers of sand and stone. Rain did not rush downward through pipes or drains. It soaked gradually into the soil, nourishing roots and refilling underground reserves. Springs emerged where pressure allowed, offering fresh water without the need for deep digging. The land itself managed these systems quietly. There was no urgency to control what already worked. Floodplains absorbed excess water, forests slowed erosion, wetlands filtered impurities. Each part of the landscape played its role without recognition, without disruption. In this world, stone remained where it had always been. Rocks rested half buried in soil, shaped by weather rather than tools. They warmed in the sun and cooled at night, marking time through temperature rather than clocks. There were no walls built from them yet, no foundations laid deep into the earth. Stone was a presence, not a resource. Life unfolded on the surface. Shelters were light and adaptable, built to coexist rather than dominate. They could be moved, repaired, or left behind without leaving permanent marks. When a structure weathered and returned to the earth, the land accepted it easily, folding wood back into soil and allowing grass to grow once more. At night, the darkness was complete. Without roads, there were no lanterns stretching into the distance. Without towns, there was no glow against the sky. Stars filled the horizon, reflected faintly in calm water. The sounds of the night, wind in trees, insects, distant animals, moved freely without interruption. The ground beneath all of this remained untouched. No trenches interrupted the soil, no channels redirected water, no buried systems waited silently below. The earth held its natural shape, layered and undisturbed, responding only to weather, seasons, and time. In this landscape, people learned patience. They waited for the land to reveal its patterns. They noticed where water pooled and where it drained. They observed which areas stayed cool and which warmed quickly. This understanding came not from maps or measurements, but from presence. Only after many seasons did the first quiet decisions emerge. A stream crossing used often enough that stones were placed to make stepping easier. A low area where water lingered, gently reshaped to guide flow away from living space. These were not transformations, but subtle adjustments, small acknowledgments of how people and land might share space. Still, the natural landscape remained dominant. Roads had not yet pressed deep grooves into the earth. Pipes had not replaced springs and wells. Stone had not been stacked into permanent forms. The land was still allowed to move, to settle, to change gradually. Time moved differently here. Without rigid infrastructure, there was no expectation of permanence. Things existed for as long as they were needed and then faded naturally. The ground did not resist this rhythm. It welcomed it. This early balance shaped how people thought about building when the time eventually came. They understood that the land did not need to be forced, it needed to be respected, that water wanted to flow, that soil wanted to breathe, that stone carried weight, both physical and symbolic. And so, when digging finally began, it did so carefully. The memory of that untouched landscape guided every early underground choice. Builders remembered how the land worked on its own. They tried, whenever possible, to follow those natural paths rather than erase them. Even now, beneath modern cities and paved roads, traces of that original landscape remain. Old streams still run quietly underground. Soil layers still reflect ancient forests. Stone still rests where it has rested for centuries, bearing the weight above without complaint. As you rest now, imagine that earlier land, unmarked, unhurried, balanced, a place where the ground did not need to be changed to be useful, a place where nature carried its responsibilities effortlessly, and a time when the earth beneath America was allowed to remain exactly as it was, calm, capable, and complete. Let that image settle gently, the land breathing slowly, water moving without sound, and the ground beneath it all holding everything in quiet harmony, just as it always has.
As early settlements became more established, daily life began to follow a gentle rhythm shaped by seasons, daylight, and careful preparation. Above ground, homes were modest and practical, built to shelter families from wind and weather. Below ground, however, another quiet world took shape, one that played an essential role in survival while remaining largely unseen. These were the hidden cellars and root houses of colonial life. They were not secret places, yet they were rarely spoken about with pride or ceremony. They existed simply because they were needed. And because they were needed, they were built with patience and care. The earth offered something valuable: steadiness. Beneath the surface, temperatures remained cool in summer and unfrozen in winter. Long before modern refrigeration, this natural balance made underground spaces ideal for preserving food. Families learned quickly that the ground itself could extend the life of harvests, protecting them from heat, moisture, and animals. Cellars were often dug by hand, one careful scoop at a time. The soil was removed slowly and intentionally, placed nearby to be reused or shaped into gentle slopes. Walls were lined with stone or reinforced with timber, not to impress, but to endure. Every piece had a purpose. Nothing was excessive. Root houses were sometimes built into hillsides, partially hidden by earth and vegetation. From the outside, they blended seamlessly with the land. A simple wooden door, often weathered and unadorned, marked the entrance. Inside, the air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of soil and stored crops. These spaces held more than food. They held reassurance. During long winters, when fields lay dormant and daylight was short, families relied on what waited below. Baskets of apples rested quietly in the dark. Potatoes and carrots lay packed in sand. Jars of preserved goods lined shelves, each one a small promise of continuity. Entering a cellar was a familiar routine: a few steps downward, a pause as eyes adjusted to the low light, the gentle creak of wood, the cool air settling around the skin. It was a moment of calm within the day, a reminder that preparation had been done, that the future was considered. Cellars were also places of order. Items were arranged carefully, often in the same positions year after year. This consistency mattered. It reduced worry. It created a sense of stability in a world that could otherwise feel uncertain. Storms came and went above ground, but the cellar remained unchanged. Root houses varied in size and design, shaped by local materials and personal experience. Some were small, barely tall enough to stand in. Others were larger, shared among extended families or neighbors. Regardless of size, each one reflected an understanding of the land and its quiet generosity. These underground spaces were rarely hurried. They were built when time allowed, expanded gradually, repaired patiently. The process of creating them often took years rather than weeks. Each adjustment was guided by observation, how moisture behaved, how walls held, how the air moved. Children learned early about these places. They were taught how to carry baskets carefully down narrow steps, how to close doors firmly but gently, how to respect the cool darkness. Cellars became part of daily life, woven into routines without fanfare. Evenings were especially quiet. After the day's work, when the sun settled low and the household grew calm, the cellar rested below, untouched and dependable. Its presence allowed families to sleep with a sense of readiness. What they needed was already stored. The earth was holding it safely. In some homes, cellars also offered refuge during extreme weather. Their solid walls and steady temperature provided comfort when conditions above grew harsh. In these moments, the cellar was not just storage, it was protection. Despite their importance, these underground spaces left little trace in written records. They were so common, so ordinary that they rarely merited mention. And yet, without them, daily life would have been far more difficult. Their value lay in their reliability, not their visibility. As years passed and technology advanced, many of these cellars were abandoned or forgotten. Some collapsed gently back into the earth. Others were sealed, built over, or repurposed. Nature reclaimed them slowly, filling spaces with soil and roots, returning them to quiet. Still, their influence remained. The idea that the ground could support daily life endured. The trust placed in the earth shaped future building decisions, and the calm practicality of these early spaces echoed through generations. Even now, when modern homes include basements and storage rooms, the concept remains the same. Cool, dark, stable spaces beneath our feet continue to serve us without demanding attention. As you rest now, imagine one of those early cellars. Stone walls cool to the touch, shelves lined with carefully arranged provisions, the quiet presence of stored abundance. Nothing hurried, nothing uncertain, just the earth holding what matters. And above it, a household at rest, secure in the knowledge that beneath them, something steady and patient remains. You too can rest with that same ease. Let the quiet of the underground settle into your breath. The earth is still holding, and for now, that is enough. Water has always moved according to its own quiet logic. Long before pipes were buried beneath towns and cities, rain and runoff followed natural paths across the land, guided by slope, soil, and stone. Early American settlers learned quickly that water could not be forced, only guided, and from that understanding, the art of moving water began. At first, there was little reason to interfere. Rain soaked into open soil, streams expanded and contracted with the seasons, wet ground dried slowly under sun and wind. The land managed water on its own, as it always had. But as settlements became more established, people noticed how excess water could linger around homes, soften foundations, and turn pathways into mud. The solution was never loud or dramatic. It began with observation. People watched where water naturally flowed after a storm. They noticed slight depressions in the land where rain gathered. They followed the subtle curves formed by repeated runoff. Rather than erase these patterns, they learned to work with them. Early drainage channels were simple. A shallow trench cut gently into the soil, allowing water to move away from living spaces. Stones placed carefully along the edges to prevent erosion. The slope measured not by tools, but by experience and patience. These channels did not rush water away. They encouraged it to continue its journey without interruption. Digging was done by hand. Each scoop of earth was lifted slowly.
The work was quiet and steady, often completed over several days. There was no urgency. A channel only needed to be deep enough to function, wide enough to remain open, and gentle enough to blend into the landscape. In many cases, drainage paths were nearly invisible once complete. Grass grew along their edges, leaves settled into their curves. Over time, they became part of the land rather than an addition to it. Only during rain did they reveal their purpose, guiding water calmly and consistently. Stone played an important role. Flat stones were laid at points where water passed beneath walkways or roads. These early culverts allowed paths to remain dry without blocking flow. Each stone was chosen for its shape and weight, placed carefully so it would not shift with time. There was no single design. Drainage systems varied by region, shaped by local soil and weather. In sandy areas, channels were shallow and wide. In clay-rich ground, they were narrower and reinforced. Along hillsides, water was guided gently downhill, never allowed to gather force. The goal was always the same: balance. Too much interference could cause erosion. Too little could lead to pooling and damage. Early builders learned that water responded best to respect. When allowed to move at its own pace, it caused little trouble. These channels served quietly. They carried rain away from cellars and foundations. They kept paths passable. They protected crops from standing water. And when storms passed, they rested again, dry and unnoticed. Children grew up around these systems without thinking of them as infrastructure. They stepped over shallow trenches. They watched rainwater follow familiar routes. They learned without instruction how water behaved and why certain paths were left undisturbed. In this way, knowledge passed naturally. There were no written manuals, no standardized plans. Experience guided each decision. If a channel failed, it was adjusted. If erosion appeared, stones were added. Every change was a lesson, quietly absorbed. As settlements expanded, drainage became more integrated. Paths were planned with water in mind. Buildings were positioned to avoid natural flow lines. Small networks of channels formed, connecting one area to another. Beneath the surface, water moved predictably, allowing life above to remain calm and dry. These systems required little maintenance. Leaves were cleared occasionally, stones were reset when needed, but most of the time they functioned on their own. Their success lay in their simplicity. Over the years, many of these early drainage channels disappeared. Some were filled in as roads were built. Others were replaced by modern systems. Many remain buried, still guiding water beneath layers of soil and pavement, continuing their work long after being forgotten. Even now, after a heavy rain, water often follows paths first shaped by those early channels. The land remembers. As you rest, imagine one of these quiet systems at work. Rain falling gently, water gathering, then moving calmly away. Stones holding steady, the earth absorbing what it needs and releasing the rest. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just the patient movement of water, guided by hands that understood its nature. Let that steady flow mirror your breath, in and out. The water moves on, and everything settles back into calm. As settlements spread outward and daily travel became more frequent, the land slowly adapted to repeated movement. Dirt roads formed where people walked, where animals followed familiar routes, and where wagons rolled carefully between homes, fields, and neighboring towns. These roads were simple, unpaved, and shaped by use rather than design. But beneath them, another quiet structure took form: stone culverts. They were not built to be seen. Their purpose was not beauty or recognition.
They existed to allow water to pass beneath roads without interruption, preserving both the path above and the land below. Before culverts, rainwater often cut across roads, carving shallow ruts and softening the soil. Wagons slowed, wheels sank, travel became difficult after storms. The solution, once again, came from careful observation rather than urgency. People noticed where water naturally crossed paths. Small streams, seasonal runoff, and low-lying areas revealed the best locations. Instead of redirecting water entirely, early builders allowed it to continue flowing just beneath the road's surface. Stone was the natural choice. Durable, heavy, and abundant, it required no processing beyond selection and placement. Flat stones formed bases. Rounded stones filled gaps. Larger stones created arches strong enough to support passing weight. Each culvert was assembled by hand. Stones were set one at a time, adjusted until they rested securely. There were no measurements beyond experience. Builders relied on balance, gravity, and patience. A well-built culvert did not shift. It held quietly, even as seasons changed. Above ground, the road appeared uninterrupted. Wagons rolled smoothly over compacted soil. Hooves pressed into dust or mud depending on the weather. Travelers passed without noticing the structure below. That invisibility was the mark of success. Below ground, water moved freely. During rain, streams flowed beneath the road without pooling. The culvert guided water gently, preventing erosion and protecting the path. Once the storm passed, the stones returned to silence, their work complete. These early culverts were often small. Some were barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Others accommodated steady streams. Their size reflected need, not ambition. Nothing was built larger than required. Over time, networks of roads developed. They connected farms, mills, markets, and towns. Beneath many of these paths, stone culverts worked steadily, unnoticed and dependable. Together, they formed a hidden system that supported movement and trade. Maintenance was minimal. If stones shifted, they were reset. If sediment built up, it was cleared. Most of the time, the culvert required no attention. Its strength lay in its simplicity. Children sometimes discovered these spaces while exploring. They peered into the cool darkness beneath roads, listening to dripping water or watching light filter through the stones. These moments offered a glimpse into the hidden layers of everyday life, structures that existed without acknowledgement. As years passed, dirt roads evolved. Some were widened, others were paved, many were rerouted. In some cases, the old stone culverts remained beneath new surfaces, continuing to function long after their builders were gone. Nature adapted around them. Roots wrapped carefully around stones, soil settled into gaps. Small animals used the passages for shelter or travel. The culvert became part of the landscape rather than separate from it. Even today, some of these early structures still exist. They lie beneath rural roads, old paths, and forgotten routes. They carry water just as they always have, bearing weight without complaint. As you rest now, imagine one of these stone culverts. Cool air drifting through a narrow passage, water moving steadily below, stones holding firm, unchanged by time. Above, a quiet road, below, a calm flow. Nothing hurried, nothing strained, just the steady support of something built carefully long ago. Let that image settle, the earth working gently, the road resting above, and you free to rest as well, supported by quiet foundations you never have to think about. As early settlements grew more permanent, one quiet necessity shaped daily life more than any other: water. Rivers and streams offered abundance, but they were not always nearby or convenient. And so, with patience and trust in the earth, people began to look downward. The rise of hand-dug wells marked a turning point, not of speed or expansion, but of stability. Digging a well was never a hurried task. It began with observation. People watched the land carefully, noting where vegetation grew thickest, where soil remained damp longer after rain, where frost melted first in spring. These signs guided decisions more reliably than tools or instruments. Once a location was chosen, the work began slowly. The first layers of soil yielded easily, rich and dark. As digging continued, the earth grew firmer. Shovels moved with steady rhythm. Buckets were raised and lowered. Each foot gained required more care than the last. Digging deeper demanded trust. The walls had to be supported as the shaft descended. Stones were placed carefully, forming a circular lining that held the earth back. Each stone was chosen for its fit, its weight, and its ability to rest securely against the next. No mortar was needed. Balance did the work. The deeper the well, the quieter it became. Sounds from above softened, light dimmed, the temperature cooled. The earth enclosed the space with steady calm. Those working below focused on breath, movement, and patience. When water was finally reached, it arrived without ceremony. A slow seep at first, then a gentle rise. Clear and cool, drawn from layers untouched by sun or wind. The well was complete, not because it was finished, but because it worked. Hand-dug wells quickly became centers of daily life. They were rarely private. Most served families or entire communities. People gathered there in the morning and evening, drawing water for cooking, washing, and tending animals. The act was routine, yet grounding. The sound of water being lifted became familiar. Buckets dipping, ropes creaking, water splashing softly against stone. These sounds marked time as reliably as sunrise and sunset. Wells were often surrounded by open space. Paths led to them from every direction. Stones were placed where feet stood most often, worn smooth over time. In these quiet gatherings, news was exchanged, children played nearby, and neighbors paused to rest. The well belonged to everyone. Its presence shaped the rhythm of the settlement. People planned their days around it. Its reliability brought comfort. Even during dry seasons, the well offered reassurance that life could continue steadily. Maintenance was a shared responsibility. Stones were checked, debris was removed, the area was kept clear. This collective care strengthened community bonds. The well was more than a structure. It was a shared trust in the earth and in one another. In colder months, wells required extra attention. Ice was cleared carefully. Covers were placed to protect the opening. The water below remained unfrozen, steady in its depth. Even when the world above felt harsh, the well stayed calm and reliable. As settlements expanded, some wells were replaced or supplemented by new systems, yet many remained in use for generations. Their simplicity made them enduring. Over time, some wells were abandoned. New technologies emerged. Piped water replaced communal drawing. Yet the old wells did not disappear abruptly. They were covered, filled in, or left to rest beneath the surface. The stone linings remained, holding their shape, quietly remembering their purpose. Even today, traces of these early wells exist beneath towns and farms.
Some are rediscovered during construction. Others remain hidden, still holding water far below. The earth keeps them gently, unchanged. As you rest now, imagine standing near one of these early wells. The air cool, the stone smooth beneath your hand, the sound of water far below, steady and calm. Nothing rushed, nothing uncertain, just the quiet assurance that the earth provides when approached with patience. Let that steadiness carry into your breath, in and out. The well remains, and for now, everything is at rest.
When people hear the word tunnel, imagination often rushes ahead, filling the dark with drama or danger. But in early American towns, the tunnels that quietly formed beneath streets and buildings were not created for secrecy or escape. They existed for something far simpler and far calmer. They existed to move goods. As towns grew denser and commerce became more organized, daily life required efficient ways to transport supplies, food, and materials without disrupting the surface above. Streets were narrow, weather was unpredictable, and movement needed to be steady rather than hurried. The answer was found beneath the ground. These early tunnels were modest in scale. They were not sprawling networks, nor were they hidden for mystery's sake. They were practical passages, dug slowly and intentionally, connecting basements, storage areas, workshops, and marketplaces. Often, they began as extensions of existing cellars. A merchant storing goods below ground might extend a passage toward a neighboring building. A tavern receiving barrels might connect directly to a nearby warehouse. These connections reduced surface traffic and protected goods from rain, snow, and heat. Digging was careful and quiet. Each foot of earth removed was considered. Walls were supported with timber or stone, depending on local materials. Ceilings were kept low, just high enough to move comfortably. There was no excess space, no wasted effort. These tunnels were dim but not oppressive. Lanterns cast soft light. The air was cool and still. Sounds were muted, absorbed by surrounding soil. Movement within them was deliberate, slow footsteps, the roll of barrels, the soft scrape of crates. Commerce flowed calmly below ground. Deliveries arrived without fanfare. Supplies were stored without exposure to the elements. Businesses operated smoothly, supported by infrastructure few people ever noticed. Above ground, life continued uninterrupted. Customers walked the streets unaware of the activity beneath their feet. Horses passed, conversations drifted by. The town appeared quiet and orderly, its hidden systems doing their work silently. These tunnels were especially useful in colder regions. During winter months, when snow piled high and paths became difficult, underground passages ensured continuity. Goods moved regardless of weather. Daily routines remained steady. There was no urgency in their use. Unlike surface roads, tunnels did not demand speed. They encouraged patience. Workers moved carefully, focused on balance and rhythm rather than haste. This steady pace reduced accidents and preserved the structures themselves. The idea of secrecy came later. At the time, these tunnels were known to those who used them. They were simply part of the working environment. Their privacy was incidental, not intentional. They existed because they made sense. As towns expanded and building techniques improved, many of these tunnels were absorbed into larger basements or filled in. Some were sealed deliberately. Others were forgotten as surface-level logistics became easier. Still, their presence lingered. In some towns, rediscovered tunnels reveal smooth stone walls, worn steps, and doorways leading nowhere. These remnants speak not of intrigue, but of routine, a reminder of how commerce flowed quietly beneath daily life. Nature adapted to these spaces as well. Moisture settled, roots reached down gently, small animals found shelter. The earth incorporated these human-made passages into its own layers, softening edges and filling gaps over time. What remains most striking is the intention behind them. These tunnels were not built to hide people, but to protect goods, not to escape danger, but to maintain order. They represent a moment when growth was supported by thoughtful design rather than speed. As you rest now, imagine walking through one of these passages, the air cool and steady, the walls close but comforting, light reflecting softly off stone, each step unhurried, each movement purposeful. There is no rush here, only the quiet work of moving what is needed from one place to another, unseen but essential. Above, the town sleeps. Below, the tunnel rests as well, its purpose fulfilled long ago. Let that calm structure mirror your own sense of rest, supported, unnoticed, at ease. Nothing more is required, just the quiet comfort of knowing that even the hidden parts of history were built with care, and that care still echoes, gently, beneath everything we do. Before concrete was poured into forms and foundations were standardized, basements were shaped by hand, experience, and a deep trust in the land itself. Early American builders did not rely on engineered plans or reinforced materials. Instead, they relied on observation, patience, and an understanding passed quietly from one generation to the next. The earliest basements were not ambitious spaces. They were shallow, modest, and carefully positioned. Builders chose locations where the ground felt stable, where water drained naturally, and where soil held its shape. Digging began slowly, guided by touch as much as sight. Earth was removed one careful layer at a time. The soil told its own story, soft in some places, dense in others. Builders learned to recognize the difference between supportive ground and unstable patches. They adjusted their plans accordingly, reshaping rather than forcing. Walls were supported with timber and stone. Rough-hewn beams cut nearby formed frames that held earth back gently. Stones were stacked to reinforce corners and bear weight. There was no uniformity, only practicality. Each basement reflected its environment. Light filtered in softly. Small openings near ground level allowed air and daylight to enter without compromising warmth. These openings were simple, sometimes no more than narrow gaps covered with wood or cloth. They provided just enough illumination to move safely. Basements served many purposes. They stored food, tools, and supplies. They offered cool refuge during summer heat. They provided warmth in winter, insulated by surrounding soil. Above all, they offered a sense of permanence in a world still finding its footing. Trust was essential. Builders trusted that their understanding of the land was sufficient. Families trusted that the earth would hold. This trust was built slowly, reinforced by seasons that passed without incident. Basements were not places of fear. They were familiar, functional, and calm. Children learned to navigate narrow steps. Adults moved confidently in low light. The space became part of daily life, as ordinary as the rooms above. Maintenance was continuous but gentle. Timbers were inspected, stones were adjusted, small changes were made as needed. These basements were living structures,
responding to time rather than resisting it. Moisture was managed naturally. Earth absorbed excess water. Ventilation allowed air to circulate. When dampness appeared, it was addressed thoughtfully. Nothing was sealed tightly enough to trap problems. The basement breathed along with the house. Over time, these spaces gained character. Marks on beams recorded past repairs. Stone surfaces smoothed with use. Each basement carried the quiet history of the family above it. As building practices evolved, concrete replaced timber and stone. Foundations became deeper and more uniform. Yet the principles remained the same: respect the land, manage water, allow movement. The early basements taught these lessons well. Many of those pre-concrete basements still exist today. Hidden beneath old homes, they continue to support weight and shelter belongings. Their walls may be uneven, their floors may slope gently, yet they endure, a testament to careful craftsmanship. As you rest now, imagine standing in one of these early basements, the air cool and still, timber beams above, solid and familiar, earth walls steady and quiet. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just a space shaped by trust in the land, in skill, in time. Let that trust extend to you now. The ground is holding, the structure is sound, and you are free to rest, knowing that even before concrete, the earth was already reliable, patient, supportive, and quietly strong. Before electricity hummed through walls and refrigeration became effortless, cold was something to be gathered, stored, and respected. In early American communities, this quiet task gave rise to structures that were both practical and serene: the ice houses. Ice houses were built with intention, not urgency. They appeared near rivers, lakes, or shaded ponds, placed where winter's cold lingered longest. Often tucked into hillsides or partially buried underground, they blended easily into the landscape. From the outside, they looked unremarkable: simple walls, a low roof, and a door kept firmly closed. Inside, however, they held a different season entirely. During winter, when water froze thick and solid, people harvested ice carefully. Blocks were cut by hand, lifted slowly, and transported with patience. Each piece was valuable, handled with care. There was no rush. The cold would remain if treated gently. The ice was stacked inside the house in deliberate layers. Straw, sawdust, or packed earth insulated the blocks, slowing the melt. The walls were thick. Air circulation was minimal. Darkness prevailed. These conditions created a steady, quiet cold that lasted well into warmer months. Once filled, the ice house became a place of stillness. The door was opened only when needed. Each visit was brief. Inside, breath appeared faintly in the air, even in summer. The sound was muted, absorbed by cold and insulation. Ice houses served entire communities. They preserved food, cooled drinks, and supported daily life long after winter had passed. Markets, households, and small businesses relied on them. The ice was shared, portioned thoughtfully, and used with care. Children remembered these places vividly. The contrast between summer heat and the ice house's cool interior left a lasting impression. The quiet inside felt different from any other space, calm, controlled, and separate from the outside world. These structures required trust in time. Builders trusted that winter's cold could be carried forward, that insulation would do its work, that patience would be rewarded. The ice house was a commitment to future comfort. Maintenance was minimal but essential. Insulating materials were replaced as needed. Drainage was checked to prevent standing water. The structure itself was kept simple to avoid unnecessary heat transfer. As warmer months passed, the ice slowly diminished, but it did not disappear suddenly. It retreated gradually, just as it had been gathered. Even late into summer, the ice house offered relief, a cool pause in the day. Over time, new technologies changed everything. Mechanical refrigeration replaced seasonal storage. Ice houses fell out of use. Some were repurposed. Others were abandoned and slowly reclaimed by the earth. Many now lie forgotten, covered by soil and vegetation, hidden near old ponds, their interiors filled with leaves, roots, and silence. Yet their purpose remains clear to those who remember. They were places of calm. They demonstrated how early communities worked with nature rather than against it, how cold, like heat, could be managed gently and respectfully. As you rest now, imagine stepping into an old ice house, the air immediately cooler, the quiet deep, light dim but steady, the feeling of being sheltered from heat and time. Nothing moves quickly here. Nothing disturbs the balance. Just the lingering presence of cold, held carefully and released slowly. Let that cool stillness settle into your breath. Your thoughts can slow. Your body can rest. Like the ice house, you are allowed to hold on to calm and let everything else melt away at its own gentle pace.
As early American towns grew closer together, people began to understand that health depended not only on clean water and fresh air, but also on what happened quietly beneath their feet. Sanitation, though rarely discussed openly, became an essential part of daily life, managed carefully, deliberately, and without unnecessary attention. The earliest efforts were simple. Waste was handled close to the surface, kept away from living spaces as much as possible. Open land allowed for natural processes to work effectively. But as communities became more compact, these methods required thoughtful improvement. The solution was not sudden or dramatic. It arrived brick by brick. Small underground channels were constructed to guide unwanted water and materials away from homes. These early systems were shallow, narrow, and carefully lined. They followed the natural slope of the land, allowing gravity to do most of the work. Brick was chosen for good reason. It was durable, uniform, and easy to work with. Brick-lined channels held their shape over time. They resisted erosion, and when laid properly, they created smooth surfaces that encouraged steady movement without buildup. Construction was methodical. Workers dug narrow trenches by hand, placing each brick with care. Mortar was mixed slowly. Courses were aligned precisely. There was no need for speed, only for accuracy. These early sanitation systems were hidden. Once completed, the ground above was restored. Paths, gardens, and streets continued as before. The success of the system depended on remaining unnoticed. Communities learned to trust these buried structures. They reduced standing water. They improved cleanliness. They supported healthier living conditions, and they did so quietly, without altering daily routines. Maintenance was part of communal responsibility. Channels were inspected, blockages were cleared, bricks were replaced as needed. This work was steady and ongoing, ensuring long-term reliability. Importantly, these systems were designed with restraint. They were never larger than necessary. Overbuilding was avoided. Builders understood that simplicity made maintenance easier and reduced failure. As towns expanded, these early efforts laid the groundwork for more comprehensive systems. Larger channels connected smaller ones. Planning became more deliberate, yet the principles remained unchanged. Follow the land, use gravity, and build with care. Over time, many of these brick-lined channels were replaced by newer infrastructure. Yet beneath some older streets, the original brickwork still exists. It continues to support modern systems, a quiet layer of history beneath current life. These early sanitation efforts represented a shift in thinking. They reflected a growing awareness of shared responsibility. Health was no longer seen as purely individual, it was communal. As you rest now, imagine one of these brick-lined channels, neatly arranged, solid, calm, water moving gently along its path, guided by careful design. There is no urgency here, only steady function, only thoughtful craftsmanship. Let that image settle into your thoughts. Brick by brick, the foundation of comfort was built. And just as those early builders worked patiently beneath the surface, you too can let your thoughts drift downward into quiet, steady rest. Everything that needs to move moves gently away. Everything that remains remains in calm balance. And you are free to sleep, supported by layers of care laid long ago. Beneath the surface of early American towns, away from wind and weather, small workshops took shape. Spaces where steady hands worked patiently in cool, sheltered calm. These subterranean workshops were not hidden for secrecy, but chosen for comfort, consistency, and quiet focus. The earth provided natural insulation. Below ground, temperatures remained even throughout the year. In summer, the air stayed cool. In winter, the cold softened. For craftspeople whose work required precision and time, these conditions were ideal. Workshops were often carved out beneath homes or alongside cellars. They were modest spaces, just large enough to hold a workbench, shelves for tools, and room to move comfortably. The ceilings were low, the walls were lined with stone or earth. Everything felt close, contained, and familiar. Light entered softly. Small windows near ground level allowed daylight to filter in without glare. Lanterns provided steady illumination after sunset. Shadows moved slowly across walls as hours passed. The sounds within these spaces were gentle and rhythmic. The tap of a hammer, the scrape of a plane across wood, the quiet turn of a wheel. These sounds echoed faintly, absorbed by surrounding earth. They did not travel far. They stayed close, creating an atmosphere of calm concentration. Craftspeople worked without hurry. They shaped wood, metal, leather, and cloth with deliberate movements. Each task required attention rather than speed. The underground setting encouraged this pace, naturally slowing the body and mind. Work below ground followed a steady routine. Morning brought preparation, midday brought focused effort, evening brought careful cleanup. Tools were placed back in their proper positions, materials were stored neatly, order was essential. These workshops supported local life. Shoes were repaired, tools were sharpened, household items were crafted and maintained. The products of this labor appeared above ground without fanfare, ready for use. Children sometimes watched from the steps. They listened to the familiar sounds. They learned through observation. The workshop became a place of quiet learning, where patience mattered more than words. The underground setting also provided protection. Materials stayed dry. Work continued during storms. The consistency of the environment allowed projects to progress uninterrupted. Over time, these spaces became deeply personal. Marks on benches recorded years of use. Tools wore smooth where hands had held them most often. The workshop reflected its occupants' habits and skill. As technology advanced, many subterranean workshops were abandoned. Work moved to larger spaces above ground. Machines replaced hand tools. Yet the quiet legacy of these workshops remains. Some still exist beneath old homes. Their walls hold echoes of careful labor. Their floors bear the marks of countless hours. Even empty, they feel purposeful. As you rest now, imagine being in one of these workshops. The air cool and still, the faint scent of wood and oil, the sound of steady work fading gently into silence. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just the calm rhythm of hands at work, supported by the earth itself. Let that rhythm slow your thoughts. Your breathing steadies. The day's work is done, and below, everything rests quietly, holding the memory of patient labor and the comfort of calm focus long after the sounds have faded away. When railroads first began to stretch across the American landscape, they brought with them a sense of movement and connection. Trains would eventually carry people, goods, and ideas across great distances. But long before whistles sounded and wheels turned, there was quieter work taking place, deep in the ground beneath the tracks. Expansion began not with speed, but with stillness. Surveyors walked the land slowly, noting elevation, soil type, and natural drainage. They followed valleys where the earth already welcomed passage. They avoided unstable ground when possible. Every decision depended on understanding what lay beneath the surface. The earth had to be trusted. Railroad foundations required stability more than strength. The weight of rails and passing trains would be constant and repeating. The ground below needed to support that rhythm without shifting. Preparation took time. Soil was leveled and compacted by hand. Loose material was removed. Stone was placed carefully to create a base that could distribute weight evenly. This layer, often unseen, mattered more than anything above it. Gravel and crushed stone followed. These materials allowed water to drain freely, preventing accumulation beneath the tracks. Moisture was guided away naturally, preserving the integrity of the foundation. The earth was encouraged to breathe. Each layer served a purpose. Nothing was added without reason. Nothing was rushed. Builders understood that mistakes below ground would echo above. As tracks extended across plains, hills, and forests, the work beneath remained consistent. Even as distances grew larger, the approach stayed methodical. The land was prepared section by section, mile by mile. Patience guided progress. Once the rails were laid, the ground continued its quiet work. It absorbed vibration. It held weight. It adjusted subtly over time, settling into balance. Maintenance crews watched for changes, making small corrections as needed. The trains above became symbols of motion, but the earth below embodied rest. While engines moved and schedules advanced, the foundation remained still. It did not seek recognition. It did not demand attention. It simply held. In many places, railroads followed older paths. Routes once used by wagons or waterways guided placement. The land's natural logic continued to influence human design. Beneath expansion, continuity remained.
As years passed, railroads transformed the nation. Towns grew along the tracks, industries flourished, movement accelerated. Yet beneath all of this, the foundational work remained unchanged, quiet, reliable, and essential. Some tracks were eventually abandoned. New routes replaced old ones. Rails were removed, but the foundations often remained. Stone beds lay hidden beneath grass and soil, still marking the path of movement long gone. Nature reclaimed these spaces gently. Roots grew through gravel, soil softened edges. The earth absorbed the structures back into itself, keeping their shape without resisting change. Even now, traces of these foundations can be found. A raised embankment, a line of stones beneath leaves, a subtle curve in the land. The earth remembers where it once carried motion. As you rest now, imagine one of these foundations. Layers of stone resting quietly, soil settled and firm, weight held without effort. Above, the tracks are silent. Below, the earth remains calm. Nothing moves, nothing needs to. The work is already done. Let that steadiness support you. The day's movement fades. The ground beneath you holds everything gently. And like the foundations beneath the rails, you can rest, secure, supported, and completely still.
Progress often moves quietly, without ceremony. In early American towns and cities, new methods gradually replaced old ones, and in that slow transition, many underground systems were simply left behind. They were not torn out or destroyed. They were allowed to rest. The shift happened gradually. New materials became available. New technologies promised efficiency and convenience. Surface-level systems expanded, and deeper infrastructure followed. In many cases, it was easier to build something new than to remove what already existed. And so, beneath streets and buildings, earlier systems remained. Stone culverts continued to carry water, even as new channels were added above them. Old drainage paths stayed in place, guiding runoff quietly. Abandoned wells were covered carefully and forgotten. These spaces did not become obsolete overnight. They continued to function as long as they could. When they were no longer needed, they settled into stillness without resistance. Builders rarely returned to dismantle them. There was no urgency, no reason to disturb the earth unnecessarily. Instead, soil was added, surfaces were leveled, and life continued above. Time took over gently. Sediment filled open spaces, roots extended downward, moisture softened edges. The underground world adapted naturally to being unused. These abandoned systems did not feel empty. They felt complete. Their purpose had been fulfilled. Their presence remained as quiet layers beneath progress. In some cases, they became foundations for newer systems. Modern pipes followed old channels, roads aligned with earlier paths. The past guided the present without being seen. In other cases, they were simply forgotten. A cellar sealed, a tunnel blocked, a culvert buried. These structures did not demand attention. They waited quietly, holding their shape. Occasionally, they were rediscovered. Construction revealed stone walls or brick passages. Workers paused, curious. These moments offered a glimpse into earlier methods, earlier rhythms of life. What stood out was the care with which these systems had been built. Even abandoned, they remained stable. Stones still aligned, bricks still held.
Their endurance spoke of patience and skill. Nature welcomed them. Animals found shelter. Water continued to move. Soil settled gently. The earth absorbed human effort into its own structure. This process was not decay, it was transition. The underground world changed its role from active support to quiet memory. As you rest now, imagine one of these forgotten systems, a stone-lined channel now dry, a cellar cool and still, a tunnel silent and empty. There is no urgency here, no regret, just the calm acceptance of change. The earth holds what is no longer needed. Above, life continues. Below, history rests. Let that sense of completion settle into your breath. Everything that needed to be done has been done. Everything that needed to move has moved on. And like those underground systems, you too can rest, peacefully, without effort, held gently by time and earth alike.
When human hands step away, nature does not rush to fill the silence. It moves patiently, almost thoughtfully, returning to places that have been left behind. Beneath towns and fields, forgotten underground spaces wait quietly, and over time, nature begins its gentle work. The process is gradual. A thin layer of soil settles where stone once stood exposed. Fine grains drift downward through small openings. Moisture follows gravity, seeping slowly into corners and crevices. Nothing happens all at once. Roots are often the first to arrive. They sense cooler temperatures and steady moisture below. Hair thin at first, they explore carefully, extending through cracks without force. Over years, they thicken, weaving around stone and timber, holding rather than breaking. Air changes softly. Spaces once ventilated by human use become still. The temperature stabilizes. Silence deepens. The underground world becomes calm in a new way. Water continues its journey. Old channels still guide runoff. Wells still collect moisture. Culverts still allow passage. Even forgotten systems remember how to function. Moss and small growth appear where light reaches. Near openings, soft green textures form, absorbing moisture and creating a quiet presence. These living layers cushion hard edges, blurring the line between built and natural. Animals sometimes follow. Small creatures find shelter. They move carefully through passages, using them as temporary refuge. These spaces become part of the larger ecosystem. The earth settles around everything. Walls lean gently, floors soften, shapes remain recognizable but less defined. Time smooths sharp edges. What once required maintenance now requires none. Nature manages balance without intervention. Moisture distributes itself. Air circulates slowly. The space becomes self-sustaining. There is no sense of loss here, only continuity. Human effort becomes part of the land's story rather than separate from it. As you rest now, imagine one of these underground spaces, cool, quiet, and softly shaped by time. Roots resting against stone, water moving slowly through familiar paths. Nothing demands attention, nothing needs repair. Everything exists in gentle balance. Let that image guide your breath. Slow and steady, the earth reclaims without force, and you, like these spaces, are allowed to let go, returning to rest, supported by the calm rhythm of nature itself.
Beneath our feet, far below the surfaces we walk each day, rests a quiet legacy. It is not marked by plaques or preserved behind glass. It does not ask to be remembered, and yet it remains, steady, patient, and enduring. The early builders of America did not set out to leave monuments underground. They built because life required it, because water needed to flow, because food needed to be stored, because paths needed to stay dry. Their work was practical, grounded, and calm. And when their work was done, they stepped away. Stone by stone, beam by beam, channel by channel, these builders shaped the land gently. They listened to the earth before altering it. They observed water before guiding it. They trusted soil, weight, and balance more than speed or ambition. What they created was not meant to be seen. Underground spaces were designed to support life quietly. They did not interrupt the world above. They made daily routines easier, safer, and steadier. Their success depended on invisibility. And because they were invisible, they lasted. Cellars remained cool through long summers. Culverts carried water through heavy rains. Wells offered reliable refreshment. Foundations held steady under growing towns. Each system rested beneath daily life, unnoticed but essential. Over generations, these structures blended into the land. Some were built upon, others were sealed and forgotten. Many still exist exactly where they were first placed, holding their shape, bearing weight, and guiding natural movement. They do not resist time, they accept it. As modern systems replaced old ones, these early works did not protest. They remained where they were, allowing progress to pass overhead. The earth wrapped around them, integrating human effort into its own rhythms. This is their quiet strength. They were never meant to dominate the landscape. They were meant to belong to it. In this way, the legacy of early builders is not found in height or visibility, but in balance. They understood that the most important work often happens where no one is looking. Even now, when cities hum and roads stretch wide, those early structures continue to do what they were built to do, or rest peacefully, their purpose fulfilled. They do not ask for maintenance. They do not require recognition. They simply remain. As you rest now, consider the ground beneath you, layered with history, shaped by careful hands, holding stories that do not need words. Every foundation beneath your home echoes that same intention: to support, to stabilize, to endure quietly. There is comfort in that thought. It reminds us that we are not alone in our need for rest, that the earth itself was shaped to carry weight without strain, that long before now, people understood the value of building things that could be trusted and then left alone. The quiet legacy beneath us teaches a gentle lesson: that strength does not need to be loud, that care does not need to be visible, and that rest is not an absence of purpose, it is the completion of it. So let your thoughts settle downward now, like stone resting into soil, like timber held steady by earth, like water guided gently home. The builders have finished their work. The land has accepted it, and you, supported by all of it, are free to rest, knowing that beneath everything, something calm, patient, and enduring remains. Nothing else needs to be done. Just rest. The ground is holding.